find some.
Unless we have more. Go ahead and take one.
I was not paying attention.
That would be really painful, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm very glad. All right. All right. If you would like a Bible, we are going to be in Daniel 3, and there's going to be quite a few parts we're going to read, so if you want to follow along, I would grab one. Does anybody want one? Anybody like the Bible? Raise your hand if you like one. Does anybody need a Bible? Okay, cool. You place? Perfect.
Over there. You got them in the corner. Can I have that paper? Back half. Thank you.
Okay. So we are going to be in Daniel 3 today. So if you want to turn there, you can feel free to. Finally, I can remember where Daniel is in the Bible. That would be great. There it is. Found it. Okay, so I'll wait for person. Grab a piece of paper and a pen if there is one. If not, you can share a pen with someone near you. You're going to need them in the future. Okay, so last Sunday, Deanna talked about Daniel chapter 1, which is about Daniel and his friends and all the people around him. They get taken from their country in Israel to Babylon, and they have him and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who I got so sick of writing their names while I was writing this out in the first place, because they're really, really long. So they are brought to Babylon, which is in Iran-ish area, if you know where Iran is, near Iraq in the Middle East. And they're brought there, and they're told that they're going to be, if you need to, there are napkins over there, that they're going to be kind of like leaders or trained to be leaders in King Nebuchadnezzar's country, okay, Babylon. I want to give you guys kind of the feeling of what it would be, or what it would feel like to be in this situation. So raise your hand if you know what's going on in Ukraine with Russia. Raise your hand if you know what's going on with that. Does someone want to give us like a short description of what's going on with that? Connor, go ahead.
The Russians invaded Ukraine because Ukraine wanted to be a part of the United Nations.
Okay, yeah, Russia invaded Ukraine. What else is going on? Any other things about what's going on? Anybody? Nick?
Countries are having to open up their borders so that Ukrainians can come and be safe from the Russians.
Yep, okay, yep, that's definitely happening. Anything else about what's going on?
It's bad.
It's bad?
Also, Switzerland took a major stand in opening up their borders and saying that they do not agree with Russia, which, if you know anything about Switzerland, that's a big
deal for them, especially, yeah. So, I want you guys to think about this, and for the moment, make no noise. I want you guys to close your eyes and think of something for me, okay? So close your eyes. I want you to think, Ukraine, you are a person living in Ukraine. You're your age, between 12 and 18 or so. So you are living in Ukraine. You probably have a few relatives who are in the military and or were kind of put into the military or fighting against the Russians. You hear every day about what's happening in the war. That's all that's going on in the news. It's all that's going on, and your constant thought is, are they going to come to my town? Right? You have relatives who are in the military or who are helping the military, and you still get letters from some of them, but not all of them. And you don't actually know how they're doing. Then one night, there starts being explosions in your town. And you wake up in the morning and you see that some of the buildings, some of the houses in your neighborhood are just completely destroyed. They're just gone. Okay? And then, right after that, you see a bunch of Russian soldiers walking into the town. And they kill your family. And they kill your neighbors. And they kill almost everyone you've ever known. And they go, you're going to go back to Moscow, Russia, and we're going to train you to work for Putin so that when you're older, you're going to help run Russia, the country that's just done all of these things to you. Okay, go ahead and open your eyes. Okay, that's a really serious thing that's going on, right? And that's exactly what what Daniel and his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are going through. Over 90% of the people they've ever met, they have seen killed before they're exiled to Babylon. Okay? It's not like their whole village is there with them. It's probably just them, right? And it's not okay, now we're under a new reign. It's no, you're going to learn how to lead in this new place. You're going to learn to be Babylonian. And unlike nowadays, there is no Switzerland, there is no United Nations, there are no other countries that care. Babylon is doing this, and everyone else is afraid of Babylon. Okay? Babylon is so big, it goes from Iran all the way to Israel, and actually a little bit farther than Israel, that King Nebuchadnezzar owns 82 other countries. Right? He has done this to 81 other countries by the time he does this to Israel. He owns everything. Basically, a person in Israel could not hope to travel for their entire life to go to anywhere but Egypt and get away from Babylon. That's how far away it is. Okay? So, his friends and Daniel and his friends are brought to this situation, and they have the food thing that goes on where they're kind of being trained and they're given food like Deanna talked about last time. And they kind of hold themselves out. They resolve in their hearts not to eat the food from the king's table, right? And in that, right after that, Daniel interprets a dream for King Nebuchadnezzar, and King Nebuchadnezzar promotes Daniel, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego kind of stay together in such a, they're promoted as well, but not nearly as high as Daniel, okay? So that's the background of what's going on. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar is not a great dude, okay? No one likes him. Also, he has a really, really long name. It's like 20 letters long, okay? That's also very hard to spell, which I still can't. Anyways, so going to Daniel 3:3 says, actually 3:1, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, which is huge, especially for that time, but it's still huge today, right? He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So one of the things I love about this chapter of Daniel is that it has an obsession with repeating really long lists. Because right after that it says, so the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. So
Daniel's just trying to hit the word count.
Exactly. He's trying to hit the word count. Fun fact, he repeats that like 5 more times in this chapter. We're not going to read it again. But anyways, all of that to say is a satrap is someone who basically runs one of these countries. Right? He owns over 80 countries. A satrap is someone who like runs that whole little country for Nebuchadnezzar. So these are really important people. This would be like if the president summoned all of the governors, all of the senators, all of the House of Representatives, and all of your mayors and local officials. Everyone who's anyone in any government position is summoned to come worship this big golden statue of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? So as that happens, he has this great idea that he's going to have people worship him, because a long time ago, before Christ came, right, a lot of kings thought of themselves as gods. They were so set apart that they were kind of like gods, and so he believes that he deserves to be worshipped. So in verse 4 it says, then the herald, or basically the guy who talks for him, loudly proclaimed, this is what you, all of the satraps and advisors, are commanded to do. O peoples, nations, and men of every language, as soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, You must fall down and worship the image of gold that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be immediately thrown into a blazing furnace. Okay, have you guys ever heard of any of those instruments? Okay, probably a few of them. I actually looked up what a zither is. It's kind of like a guitar without any frets. Anyways, I found out they stopped being popular in 1920. They were like made all the way until then. Anyways, so basically it's like this idea that all of the different people are going to show up and all of the music is going to be played and they just have to bow down and worship this statue because to them, right, to King Nebuchadnezzar, all of their power comes from King Nebuchadnezzar. So they should worship him. That's what he thinks, okay? And if you don't, you're going to get thrown into a blazing furnace. Has anyone ever played with a candle or played with matches? Has anyone ever extinguished a candle, like with their fingers?
Yeah.
How do you do it?
You lick your fingers.
Lick your fingers and you go really quick,
Yeah.
right? So what happens if you try to approach it really slowly? It starts getting really hot and it burns you, right? And even that little feeling isn't very nice, right? Any amount of fire that's there is not a good feeling. Like it hurts, it's painful to be around. So he's saying, if you don't fall down and worship, you're obviously not good enough to be one of my governors, satraps, treasurers, or anything. And I'm going to have you thrown into this giant fire to die. Okay? Little extreme, maybe. Not like your fire. This is how he fires people, apparently. Yes, he literally fires them. It's like that show where Trump used to yell, "You're fired" at people, but the consequences are much worse. So, as he's doing this, right, everyone falls down and worships, except for three guys named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whose name, every time I hear it, I think of a billy goat, because that's what it reminds me of. Anyways, so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't bow down. Now imagine there's like, let's say 8,000 people, right? There's tons and tons of people here bowing down to the statue. 3 people don't. Talk about awkward, right? Imagine if you were at if you're at a public school, imagine even just being at like EHS or another public school, and everyone bowing down to something in a big courtyard except for you. And it'd feel really, really awkward, right? So, and all of the other important people see that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't bow down. And so they go to Nebuchadnezzar and they go, "Hey, there's 3 guys who didn't bow down and worship your statue. We're really mad at them because of this for some reason. And you should throw them in the furnace because that'll be cool." And King Nebuchadnezzar goes, "Wow, that's a great idea. It's exactly what I said would happen." So he goes to them and he says, what verse is it? It's
13.
13? Perfect. Yeah, so furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true?" They say, "Yeah, bro." And he says, "I'm going to give you a second chance. Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all other kinds of music," we're going to do this just for you guys, you need to, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Now, this is one of those things. I think that a lot of people in political power think like this, especially Putin, right? Or you're going to use him. Thinks, who is going to save you? What is going to save you from me? Right? This guy has destroyed their entire nation. And probably in his opinion, he's like, I'm being really nice to these guys. I'm going to give them a chance to be leaders. Right? And he's saying, what God? Because it's not going to be your God, because I beat your God in the war. Right? He beat Israel. He doesn't believe that their God is anything. So he says, what God is going to save you? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they look at him and they replied to the king, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." So, this is one of one of the coolest parts, I think, in the Old Testament. Because this idea where if they knew that God was going to save them, that's one thing, right? Be like, hey, God's going to save us, throw us in the fire, whatever. But they're like, hey, God can save us, and we know that. But even if he doesn't save us, even if we knew that he wasn't going to save us, we wouldn't bow down, right? That's crazy to me. That idea of, they're like, even if God told us he wasn't going to save us, right? Do you, like, in my mind, if that was going to happen to me, I'd be like, God, you can do that, but I don't really expect it, right? These guys don't know that God is going to save them. They think they're probably going to die, but they want Nebuchadnezzar to know that. But the other thing that's crazy to me is they don't try to convince him, right? Have you ever had like that moment where like someone is like telling you something that you know is wrong or demanding you do something that you know is wrong, and there's like that impulse to want to like convince them, right? Has anyone ever felt that? Impulse to try to convince someone when you know that you're right and they're wrong? I just love that they don't try, because I think in their minds they're thinking, Nebuchadnezzar wants us to worship this thing of gold, right? Nebuchadnezzar is kind of crazy, thinks that he's God. I don't think we're going to make much headway. We'll just let God prove himself. We don't have to defend God at this point, right? God can defend himself. We don't have to be the gatekeepers to prove to other people that God is super powerful. God can do it if he wants, right? So, with that, I want you guys to take your note cards and a pen, if and when you have one, to write an answer to this question. I'll write it down. What are two things that our culture demands that you believe or agree with that you think are wrong? I'm going to write it down. What are two things that our culture demands that you agree with or believe agree with or believe that you think are wrong? That means our culture, for the most part, demands that you believe that murder is wrong. I hope that you agree with our culture in that. So not one of those things. What is something our culture demands that you agree with or believe that you think is wrong?
You said 2 examples?
2 examples. When you have them, go ahead and look at me. You're going to want to have them because we're going to talk about them during small groups, okay? So make sure you get them. 2 things that our culture... It's okay? Worry about it. Yes, Caleb?
What do you mean by our culture?
Our culture, so like the non-Christian culture in America. Non-Christian culture in America.
You wrote demands twice.
It demands it, guys.
They very much demand it. It was completely on purpose. I don't know what you're talking about.
I think it's those names that you're writing down.
Exactly. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
And
a Billy Goat.
And a Billy Goat, exactly. I remember, like, has anyone ever heard of Adventures in Odyssey?
Yeah.
When they talk about this story in there, one of the kids keeps on making fun of it as a Billy Goat, and that's why it's stuck in my head. Anyways.
I don't even know one.
It's okay, you'll be able to talk about it during small group if you can't think of one. But here's one thing I want you guys to think about. So there's a saying that says, if you don't know what kind of water you're swimming in, then you won't, or if you don't know that you're swimming in water, you won't know what air is. Basically, this idea, if you don't know what the culture around you is demanding of you, then you'll just assume it's correct, and that's the only way. Does that make sense? Hopefully I didn't say that's super confusing.
That's kind of confusing.
Yeah, sorry. If you don't know what our culture is demanding, then you'll assume that it's the only way. Does that make sense?
I don't know. Like,
It's okay.
You just said culture. Like, there's no category or anything.
Yep, exactly. So you could choose a subset if you would like a smaller part. Okay, if you are done, go ahead and look up at me so I know I should keep going. Our culture demands.
We demand
It's
certain
excited
like
about
asking for what you want.
What
What do you
Dana
want
demands?
from me?
What do you want?
What do you want? With the think and the wrong.
Yes. Okay. Now, what's so interesting about, like, what's kind of crazy, and I don't know how much Daniel is, like, being, like, maybe, like, how he's emphasizing this. Also, I don't know where Daniel is during this story, because I can tell you pretty convinced that Daniel doesn't bow down, so I guess he's, like, on a mission somewhere, because no one gets mad at him for this. But,
Daniel's invisible.
is that as Daniel writes this, one thing he says about the blazing furnace, because these guys are going to the blazing furnace, they're bound up, they're tied up, and they're going to be thrown into the blazing furnace. And it's so hot that the people who throw them in die of heat.
Wow.
Right? Think about that. The people who throw them into the fire cannot recover from how hot it is. It burns them just to throw them in the fire. And it also says that King Nebuchadnezzar and all of the other people that he's invited are watching. Which is also kind of weird and twisted, right? So they're, yeah, weird. Okay, so he orders it to be 7 times hotter, and it says the king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisor, "Weren't there only 3 men that we threw in and not 4? So in the fire, they see the shadow of a 4th person. Now, I tell you that most people that I've looked at, most people, like almost unanimously, believe that this 4th person is either an angel or potentially Jesus, okay, in the fire. So basically, an angel or Jesus comes and rescues them, and they don't get burnt at all. And Nebuchadnezzar is like watching this, like these people, like he sees the guards who throw them in die. And he's like, oh my gosh, the guards just died, and they're still standing there, like standing up straight. And Nebuchadnezzar, kind of crazily, runs up to the furnace that he just saw people be near and die. So I don't know if he's very smart, because he runs up to the furnace, gets close enough to go, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, other person, come out! Come out of the furnace, and they walk out. Unsinged, it says they don't even smell like smoke. And King Nebuchadnezzar immediately starts confessing that the God that saved Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is the true God, and that people should worship that God and not him. Okay? Now, can you, anybody remember, shout it out if you do, what did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do to convince King Nebuchadnezzar that their God was real? What did they say to convince him that their God was real? Anybody remember?
Nothing.
Literally nothing. They go, we know our God's real. He's going to save us if he wants to. Right? It's literally like this. Like, if he chooses, he'll save us. Like, what do you know? They don't say anything to try to convince him, but he's convinced. Right? So, in a lot of times, I think that we have this idea that there are people who don't believe in God, and we feel the need to convince them to believe in God. Right? If I don't say this, then what's God going to do? You know, if I don't preach the gospel to them right now. And I think preaching the gospel is great. And I think God brings openings to the preaching of the gospel. But God is going to work through people who want to be worked through. And sometimes that looks like preaching, and sometimes that looks like actions, where people just stand their ground and say, I know this is right and this is how I'm going to live my life, because this is how God says that I should live my life. And I don't need to convince you that I'm right. This is just what I'm going to do. Right? When I was in school, I probably made the mistake. I had a biology class my sophomore year of high school with a teacher named Mrs. Poyer. I do not like Mrs. Poyer, but
I think he's still there.
there you go. I don't like Mrs. Poyer very much. So in her class, we started talking about evolution. And I, being a very outspoken kid, would just ask question after question after question about evolution that she couldn't answer, and I pretty much kind of figured that she couldn't answer them, so I looked up more and more questions to ask. To the point where after 3 days of this, we skipped that unit of the class. It was just not on the final. She was like, okay, we're moving on. Because she was so annoyed. And honestly, I don't think that that was probably the best thing that I could have done, right?
But I feel like that's also a fair way to go about it, though. That's
It
the way
can
that
be.
you live your life, I guess that could be
Yeah. No, and it could be.
asking questions.
Right? I think that's true. It can be the right way. I don't think I went about it in the right way. And I don't think it was a good witness to the other people in the class or to her. I think it would have been better for me probably to simply say what I believed when I was asked, learn the information that is whatever, and not try to upstage the teacher, right? In the same way as Nebuchadnezzar's asking Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in front of all these people, they don't try to upstage him. They just say, hey, this is what we believe. That's all I got. Like, I don't need to convince you right now, right? We're going to let God convince you. Does that make sense? So, what I think is really awesome, though, is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego put themselves in a position for God to use them, right? Sometimes we get the feeling in the grocery store, I don't know if you've ever gotten the feeling in a grocery store to witness to someone. I have about 50 million times. Usually while I'm grabbing high things for short people. But there's sometimes where I get that feeling, there's sometimes I don't. And I think it's very important to let God tell us and use us when he wants us to, and not try to force the issue when God isn't telling us to do that, right? God knows when people will be open to words. God knows when people will be open to deeds. And he probably knows better than we do when people will be open to those different things. And that's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do. They live their life in faith, they don't compromise, and God uses it without them having to preach at all. Which is, I think, a very good thing to know for all people who have stage fright. Is that God can use you when you have faith, regardless of what you say. Right? God is willing to use Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he uses them in their faithfulness. If Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would have bowed down, God probably wouldn't have used them, right? God wouldn't have used someone who's not faithful in that. But they toe the line, they keep strong in the faith, and God uses them how he pleases, and it turns out way better than them preaching to Nebuchadnezzar. Because if they would have preached to Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar might have gone, okay, you guys can believe that. Right? But the miracle is so big that when it happens, Nebuchadnezzar says, everyone needs to believe this. Which is kind of crazy. So, with that, we're going to pray quick, and we're going to go to small groups. Yeah, Deanna?
Just before we all leave and pray and stuff, if you guys can clean up your own area, my middle school girls are picking up every Sunday after you guys, and there's pillows and trash, and I don't think it's fair to them. So
Yes.
clean up around your area.
Clean up your space. That's a good call. With that, that is all I have. So everyone bow your heads and close your eyes. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for the stories of the New and the Old Testament, Lord. Please help us to be able to take messages from Shadrach, Meshach, and the Billy Goat, and help us to listen to your voice about what we should do, when we should speak, when we should stay silent. And please help us to remain faithful in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. Leaders.
It definitely is.
This is the new schedule. So you don't need the second page, you can just give them the first page for today. Yeah, give them at the end. Oh, did I not give you enough? Yeah, so it's every other day. You don't need to pass out this one. You can just pass out that one. I tried to print it double-sided and I
You
messed
guys
up.
have not like picked up the pillows and the stuff before you're all going downstairs. I'm not trying to be like amazing.
There's only 2 high school girls. Yeah, that's fine. I think we'll still have a good conversation.
Are you looking up?
Yeah.